Now, let us talk straight away about the rule of law, because the rule of law is being pressed and bent and kind of pressured by all sorts of things and all sorts of people and all sorts of timings. Let's talk to Helen Dale, writer, lawyer, political commentator, friend of the show, of course. She's been very, very good over the course of the last few weeks, talking to us about her views on all manner of things. Today, Helen, I think we do need to talk about this rule of law, because where are we exactly with civil liberties in this country, and how do we stop the government from continuing to take them away?
Well, we've morning, Mike.
Good
This is
morning.
actually
Sorry.
now good morning. So it's all right. I'm back from Scotland now, so the usual background is in place. We have actually reached quite a serious impasse with rule of law issues.
Yeah.
Now, by way of background, the rule of law is an overarching term that describes somewhere between 8 to 10 foundational principles, depending on how you describe them, that are taught to all lawyers in the first year of your law course, and are constantly, typically in a course called legal method,
Yeah.
legal reasoning, and that are constantly hammered home to you every year of your degree, and then when you go and do your articles or traineeship or apprenticeship or pupillage. They're constantly drummed into you. Now, the two that are under threat, and there are very serious problems at the moment because of the way the Coronavirus Act is being used, and because of the way the public health legislation going back to 1984 is being used, the two that are under threat are actually the two most important. And the first one is treat like cases alike. That is the first principle. And also the corollary of that is treat different cases differently. The second principle is laws must be general, they must be prospective, and they must be clear. And the lawyer's definition of clear is capable of being followed. You need to be able to do them. Okay, that's
Right.
really quite.
And that's an interesting one here, isn't it? Because even Boris Johnson wasn't sure when he was asked the question the other day precisely what the rules were in the Northeast, and they're about to change again. And I don't think anybody in this country now knows. I mean, I made an allegory yesterday. I said, if I took a train to Newcastle, I don't actually know what I'm allowed to do technically when I get off the train. I don't know if I'm allowed to walk into a bar in the station. I don't know, having walked into that bar, whether I'm allowed to sit down or stand up or go to the bar and get a drink, or sit down and wait for somebody to come and bring me a drink, or invite somebody I don't know that I've met on the train to come and have a drink with me, or meet somebody that I already know who I might want to invite to lunch with me. I have no idea what to do.
Well, this is a major part of the problem with badly drafted, opaquely drafted legislation. And there's actually a barrister called Adam Wagner,
I know.
who I recommend you follow on Twitter.
I think I do.
Exactly in the context of those regulations that you're talking about and how confused you are. Although, admittedly, he did this last week, so it's quite likely that they've changed again. He actually went through in a long Twitter thread, he does this, and he's very careful the way he does it, and pointed out where they all contradicted each other. Yeah. And pointed out where they were just absurd and very difficult to follow and counterintuitive, hard to find out exactly what was going on in different parts of the country, and so on and so forth. Now, and Adam has been splendid on this kind of thing, and there's a few of them. I've tried to do my bit, but I haven't been in full-time practice since mid-2016, whereas people like Francis Ha and the Twitter account Legal Fictions, which is a group of lawyers, and also Adam Wagner, they've been terrific on just and they also are very kind. They try to explain what is going on to help people understand, and they don't charge anything for it. They're doing it for free, although you have to remember that in that context it's not considered legal advice under the auspices of the Law Society. So the rule of law, first point, not treating like cases alike. There are two very clear instances of it. The first one is the one that we all know about. Black Lives Matter protesters were treated differently from the anti-lockdown protesters. And it appears to be, in part, on the basis of race, although because both the lockdown protests and the Black Lives Matter protests were racially mixed, it's more likely to be on the basis of politics.
Yes.
You cannot have that and run civil society. So that one we all know about. But the recent one is the corollary point of treating different cases, not being able to treat different cases differently. And this concerns the university students who are being locked in their halls of residence and treated as though effectively they were as in the same sort of risk category as elderly people in care homes. This is obviously not true. You have had Professor Sikora on here explaining why this is not true. You don't need me to explain it any further. And that is a separate issue from the fact that they have been invited into their halls of residence and have paid their tuition fee. And you talked about them being rinsed for over 9,000 quid a year. That is only the tuition.
Yes.
The reason why student debt is escalating and why you're getting this movement among younger, poorer people who are less well off or might be the first person in their family to go to university for free university tuition, is not really the tuition, it's the issue, because the rent to stay in university accommodation is in addition to the fees.
Yeah.
People don't realise that. And very often these young people, either they or their parents or their scholarship provider or the government have paid up front. So now you're getting the universities starting to back off, and particularly after the incident where a chap from Sky News was using a selfie stick to interview kids, freshers, who'd been locked in by Manchester Metropolitan University.
But were they actually locked in though, Helen? Because my question to some of these students was, when I was a student, and I admit that it was a very much longer time ago than I'd care to tell you, we would have not been told to behave and then behaved. We would have immediately started walking out and going, well, we're not having any of that, thanks very much.
Well, this is what has happened at Coventry University, isn't it? The students were told you can't socialise, you can't go to the pub, you can't do any of the things that normal students do, particularly when they're living away from home for the first time in their lives. And so what did they do? They organised an illegal rave. Just talk to a few people who've been councillors in various London boroughs. This is what happens.
Right.
And anyone who thinks that university students are going to be any different is in for a big surprise. But I did think those kids, there have been reports, certainly about university security trying to keep them in. There also have been reports about police doing it. Now, I don't know whether the police have been involved in this, and I will be very alarmed if they are, because that is actually worse than private security paid by the university, because you can at least litigate privately against the university, whereas the police, it's a bit more difficult because it's an arm of the state.
Right. And then you've got the COVID marshals who don't seem to fit into either one of those categories, who, as far as I'm aware, don't actually have any legal right to do anything to you.
Well, this is the thing, that the entire problem with this, and this falls into the second category of the rule of law problems, where we've got the law must be general, applies to everybody.
Yeah.
It must be prospective as to the future. You can't pass legislation that makes something illegal today, that was legal yesterday, and then ping someone for something that they did last week. That's known as the presumption against retroactive or retrospective law.
Although, I don't want to veer off into another tangent here, but HMRC are getting quite good at doing that, retrospective penalties for people, because they say that they've broken tax rules which weren't in place at the time that they allegedly broke them.
Yes, I know. HMRC are notorious for this, and it really is. It's rinsing people.
Yeah.
And it is a notorious grey area, because the presumption against retroactive law is always stronger in the criminal law than it is in the civil law. But because of the way tax penalties work, they're in this awful grey area between civil and criminal law. So yes, I don't like that either, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah.
So you've got this situation where people don't know where they stand. They don't know what the laws are. They're very hard to follow. They're confusing, and they're also encouraging. And this is a separate issue again from the two rule of law points, although it's related to them. They're also encouraging snitch behaviour. Yeah. So you get Stanley Johnson being snitched on. You get Jeremy Corbyn being snitched on. And this has been going on for quite a long time. I remember when the writer for the Times, was loudly proclaiming, Caitlin Moran was loudly proclaiming that lockdown was easy, and then her next door neighbour, who was he was a nurse for the NHS, then sort of tweeted out to the world, oh, by the way, she's breaking all the lockdown rules, and this is when we were in hard lockdown.
I missed that.
in her back garden.
Yeah.
And I sort of thought, and at the time I laughed, and I did retweet it, because it did show this problem that the media class has with thinking rules for thee and not for me, which has been quite a serious problem at the presses. You saw it yesterday, and a lot of people, including a writer I admire, a travel writer for the Telegraph, pointed out, these people seem to want another hard lockdown. And they seem to want it in part because it's easy for them, although quite a lot of them also fall into the category of individuals who say they support the lockdown. And we talked about this last week on the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. We talked about this problem of people who say they support the lockdown,
yes,
and then when it's inconvenient, they breach the rules,
right,
and then lie to pollsters about it, which
yes,
makes it very difficult for the government to know what people actually are thinking in their heads.
Because what's weird at the moment, Helen, is the government is hanging its hat on the fact that most of the public are doing the right thing. And Boris keeps repeating that as if it's somehow an amazing talent that he has managed to get to be the Pied Piper of people doing the right thing. And they're all doing it because they respect him. And he's kind of trying to bathe in the reflection of what I would say is a completely false narrative. Because everybody I talk to tells me that at some point or other, whether inadvertently or by mistake, they've done something they perhaps shouldn't have done.
Well, yes, and this is what is generating this really, really unpleasant social discord that does lead to the snitching behaviour. And the most recent examples of it are Stanley Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
And and you've got the classic picture of Jeremy Corbyn on the front page of the paper looking like Captain Grumpy, and then you get the picture of you'll get Stanley Johnson going, "Oh, I forgot, or I just came back from overseas."
Well, at least, I suppose the good news for Stanley Johnson is at least he was papped by what looks like a professional photographer, whereas Jeremy Corbyn has got a friend who basically sold a picture of him to the Sun.
Yes, I mean, for a given value of friend, I suppose you have to have to say there. But so these things are. I'm staying away from the science because you've got Professor Sikora and people who are much more knowledgeable about this than me, and just focusing on the civil liberties and also the implications of the civil liberties breaches, part of which seems to stem. And this is where I caused a bit of a stink on social media last night when I said this.
I saw.
From people who simply cannot understand why other people have different preferences from them. So you get the upper middle class journalists and the media class who do, as my Telegraph writer tweet pointed out, seem to want another lockdown because lockdowns are easy for them and they like them. Some people, a significant number of people, it has become clear, prefer to work from home.
Yeah.
They don't like the daily commute and they think it's bloody great. And they also, the other corollary of this is they also are being paid in funny money.
Yes.
I mean, that's what we're all being paid with well, not all of us, but a significant percentage of the British population is being paid with what amounts to funny money.
Yeah.
And at some point, the merry-go-round is going to stop and the chickens will come home to roost and every other kind of cliche you can think of. And we're going to have to, that money is going to have to be repaid because it is being generated by a gross increase in the amount of the annual deficit and overall debt. And already before the austerity program, debt was high. Austerity brought it down, and now, but it in many respects failed. It caused serious problems with social care, as we now know, and people who are disabled. I mean, Ed Davey, the Liberal Democrat chap, does have a point about disabled people. And but the thing is, the debt is real. It's not going to go away. And at some point, the funny money has to stop. So you've got that group of people who love lockdown and want more of it, or at least very strict restrictions, because it gives them an opportunity to work from home and spend more time with their children and not have to spend an hour on the tube each way.
They don't have to meet any horrible working class people either.
Well, yes. And then you've got other people who are being driven completely round the bend by this, by being locked in their houses, people who need social interaction in the office in order to come up with good ideas with their work colleagues. Okay, they often accept, I noticed last night when I was talking to people like this, that the days of the 5-day-a-week commute are perhaps over. And that's fine, but they still need 2 to 3 days a week in the office in order to get their heads on straight.
Well, apart from anything else, Helen, I mean, it's a natural human state. I was talking to Neil Oliver about this yesterday. It's a natural human state to socialise and to mix with people in person. It's not a natural state to sit staring at a computer screen with 10 people on it who are all staring into this kind of, abyss without having any interaction with actual people. It's ridiculous.
Well, this is why there are reasons why. I mean, think of cartoons, for the famous ones from the New Yorker or Matt in the Daily Telegraph. There are always cartoons that are about the water cooler, standing around the water cooler, or going to the office cafeteria for a coffee, or going to Pret for a coffee. This kind of thing. There are always cartoons about it because that is when people socialise and interact. And a significant percentage of the population needs that.
Right.
And it's not just for their work to be better at their jobs. It's also they need that as human beings, which is Neil Oliver's point, of course, and your point as well. And what we've noticed, and this is fed into the problems with the rule of law and fed into the snitching as well, the snitch behaviour that we're now seeing today, is they don't understand each other, and they are mistaking, both groups are doing this, their preferences for everybody else's preferences. And this is aided and abetted by that headline polling figure from YouGov, and other polling companies have found something similar, that 78% of people support the lockdown. And then you've got other figures showing that 40% of people routinely breach the lockdown rules or other significant restrictions on their behaviour, even if it's not a full lockdown. So everyone is telling lies to themselves, and well, not everyone, but a significant percentage of the population are lying to themselves, lying to other people, lying to pollsters. You finished up with the government not actually in control of its own legislative programme. You've got the abrogation now, although I understand why the Speaker, Sir Lindsay, did this, of parliamentary scrutiny, for the simple reason that this is a time, realistically, yesterday, had John Bercow not made an absolute spectacle of the role of Speaker last year, this is a time that we really should have had that ability of the Parliament to take control from the executive, from the Cabinet, because it included many Tories, many Labour, and I suspect all of the Lib Dems and SNP, so they would have had the numbers. This is a time for Parliament to exercise that power, to use the expression last year, to take control of the order paper and do things with it. And Sir Lindsay didn't select that amendment for very good reasons, because he doesn't want to start that whole charade up that Bercow did last year. And yet what you've got, this is ministerial. These are ministerial orders.
Right, but also they're too vague as well, Helen. All that they really do is allow the government to do what it wants. It doesn't set out in any way a section of this is what we want to do, so that at least you could then say, all right, well that's okay, that's not okay. You know what I mean? So we're basically giving carte blanche to do whatever they want.
Well, this is exactly the point. And this is the second issue, rule of law issue, that is being impinged upon, about laws being general, prospective and clear, capable of being followed. But the other point is that when ministers do that, they're actually using the prerogative power. That ministerial power is part of the royal prerogative. It comes from the Crown. It's effectively absolutist. It has roots in absolutism. And yet Parliament is not able to scrutinise it. And then Sir Lindsay is placed in the awful position of having to say, no, I can't select that amendment, because this ability of the Speaker to select an amendment that does give the Parliament more power was abused so grossly last year, and it reduced the mother of parliaments, to confine it to the Palace of Westminster, to make it into a global laughingstock.
Right. And also, let's not forget, this takes us now into April of next year, which will be the next opportunity we have to see whether anything else can be changed. But God knows where we'll be by then, Helen.